All right, chapter 1, we saw that God's righteousness is revealed, and we speak of His righteousness. Primarily, Paul here is speaking of His faithfulness to His promises that throughout the ages are being rightly fulfilled. And we know, as Paul will describe to us, that happens in Jesus Christ. In chapter 1, last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, I can't remember the timing, we learned that the Gentiles who did not have the law had enough truth displayed to them in creation to know better. So the things that they did that were against the truth that was revealed to them leaves them without excuse. They're guilty. In this, really, Paul sets up kind of almost what we would call as a courtroom scenario here. And first makes the case that Gentiles have no excuse. They're under condemnation. That's a righteous judgment from God. And now he's moved on to the Jews. The Jews have the law. And still we find that they are without excuse as well. Okay? So he's making this case now for the Jews, having already made it for the Gentiles. Now I think I was ready for verse 17 in chapter 2. I think that's about where we left off last week. We had a big sidetrack, if I remember right, last week.
Two, I marked it too.
What's that?
17,
Okay.
I marked it too.
All right. But if you call yourself a Jew, this is one of the places where I suspicion, and I only suspicion this, and have read scholars, smarter people than me, who have made this case, that maybe here Paul has in mind what we've talked about as being probably a part of the audience, at the very least, proselytes, converts to Judaism, by birth Gentile but become a Jew, which is God's intent, right? To convert people to be the people of God, all one people of God. So now he says here, it's like you were a Gentile, and now you think perhaps that you can rely on the fact that you know the law, that you keep some of the markers of the law, you get circumcised, you do the Sabbath, you observe the Sabbath, and you think what? Because now you're not a Gentile, those dirty, scummy people, that now you can rely on your observance of these issues of law. And he says, but if you call yourself a Jew and rely on, this word rely on means essentially to rest on. You can kick back now, right? You're in. You're in based on, and it's proven by the fact that you observe Sabbath and so forth. So you rely on the law and boast in God and know His will and approve what is excellent. Because you are instructed from the law. Okay, so comparing themselves, and he's kind of setting up this diatribe, right? This is the way Paul speaks through these things, is this argument with the straw man, and saying, look, you can say you know that those people were condemned who never knew anything about the law, the terrible idolatrous things that they were doing. There's quite the impressive list there of things that they were caught up in. You know that. But now here, you are aware of the law. You approve of what is in the law. You prove that it's excellent. You are instructed in the law. And in that, you think you can rest on the knowledge of the law. Or on that, you're trying to observe the law, maybe those are grounds. Maybe they think that they can kick back now and say, we're different than those people over there. And if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children. Okay? So here's one word that I will key in on a little bit, is the word light. If you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light, well, Paul's reaching back right into the covenant. God has a covenant promise, and then the covenant involves two people, right? Israel also. So God has these covenant promises that He's made with Israel, and Israel's side of the bargain, so to speak, is what? One way it's spoken of as being a light. That's, again, backing up here, we can't say this too much, is that the reason the Jews existed as a nation, Israel, the reason God said, all right, here's Abram, he's a Gentile, I'm going to take this one man right here, and I'm going to create out of him this nation, is, again, there He told him in Genesis 12 is all families in the whole world are going to be blessed through you. That's your purpose. That's why there's going to be an Israel. He says in Exodus, He says, I'm going to separate you, take you out of Egypt, and you're going to be a holy nation of priests to draw all people to God. That's your purpose. My covenant are these things, is to bless you for these reasons that you're going to fulfill these purposes. And another way it's spoken of in the Old Testament is this same principle is the reason you exist, the reason this covenant exists, the reason you're separated out is to be the light to the whole world, to draw people in. So let's look at a couple of texts here. Isaiah 42. Because this is fundamental. This idea of understanding the purpose of Israel. 42:6. I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. Okay, so there's covenant. Sounds like that is for them, right? It almost could sound like that, but there's a reason. It's not just for them, it's for the world. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prisons, those who sit in darkness. Okay? So, this is not just a covenant, this is a covenant to Israel to create these circumstances through which they can serve as a light, but there's also a covenant to the whole world. And this is how He's going to do it. This is His plan, this is His method, this is what He's going to do. That's why Israel exists. Okay? So, what's kind of a travesty if there's a reason you exist and you have all these advantages in covenant and you don't do it. You don't do it. That's kind of a problem, right? Let's look at another one. So you can have a couple to mark in your Bible to know what to go back to someday when you need to make this case. Be reminded. 49:6. It is too light a thing that you should be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to bring back the preserved of Israel. I will make you as a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. Okay. All right, so that's purpose. And so here now that they have the law that incriminates them, essentially is what ends up happening. They also have their unfulfilled side of the covenant. There's another issue that has to be contended with. Let's see. Let me read on here a little bit. a teacher of children having, this is back to Romans chapter 2, having the law, the embodiment of knowledge and truth. This word embodiment, it's the embodiment of law and truth. So is there any value in the law? Within the law, is embodying and something to carry along the truth of who God is? The word here is, in Greek, you'll recognize this as a root, morphosis, something morphs, it's transformed. Law is the embodiment and formation of truth. So it does carry, the law having been given now, carry the fuller and more detailed truth of who God is and what He's like, and then therefore what we should be like, because we know that. You then, who teach others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, dishonor God by breaking the law. For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Well, this is kind of a crummy realization, is that here you are, God favored you. He created a nation. He made you into a nation. He grew you into a numerous people. He blessed you with a place to call your own in Israel, the land of Israel. He lifted you up, raised you up, and then, it just gave you the temple. It just naturally follows in, right, that you're going to be on board with the very purposes that God created you for. Of course, that's going to happen, right? Why wouldn't you do that? If God raised you up and favored you in those ways, of course you're going to do all the things that God had planned for you to do for Him, for the sake of the whole world. Of course, right? No, that's not what happens. For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Well, bummer. That's what actually ended up happening. So you back up to some of these question marks here that come beginning in verse 21. You don't teach yourself. You commit adultery. You chase after, or maybe not chasing after idols, but you rob temples. So that's a weird one. In all these things that you claim to be able to teach and to lead other people to and somehow enlighten people, but because you're like everybody else, you're a sinner. It does nothing more than draw a negative sense to who God is, because you claim to be attached to Him in your behavior. So these things, maybe there's an individual Jew that could go on just a few things that are listed here and say, well, I've never done one of those things. Here's one that's really odd. Let's see, you who abhor idols, do you rob temples? And one commentary I read said, well, it happened. Is that sometimes maybe Jews or maybe even Christians might be justified in their own thinking of, well, here's a temple that's to a false god, which they were plentiful in the Roman world, right? And there's the temple. And as then people bringing in their sacrifice of meat to that temple, to the false, non-living god, somebody who knew there was a living God might say, well, that doesn't mean anything. I'm just going to go in there and take it. And it doesn't mean a thing. So somehow or another they were engaging with the temple in that odd way. I don't know. That might be a little bit of speculation, but I'm not sure why else it would be written like that. But nonetheless, if you were here last week, you might recall that we went to James chapter 2, verse 10. What did that say? If you break one point of the law, you've broken the law. All right? So essentially the argument here then is, that's every one of you. It's a fact that you've broken, I know you've broken at least one point of the law. That makes you a lawbreaker. And then here you are trying to preach to other people what they should do according to the law. This is an age-old problem. Let's look at Ezekiel chapter 36. Verse 20. But when they came to the nations, wherever they came, they profaned my holy name. And that people said of them, these are the people of the Lord, and yet they had to go out of his land. But I had concern for my holy name, which the house of Israel had profaned among the nations to which they came. Therefore say to the house of Israel, thus says the Lord God, it is not for your sake, O house of Israel, that I am about to act, but for the sake of my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations to which you came. And I will vindicate the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, and which you have profaned among them. And the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the Lord, when through you I vindicate my holiness before their eyes. Okay, so this is age-old. You might recognize this from Ezekiel. They are in exile. They're in exile. The Jews are at that point in Ezekiel. And so this blaspheming the name of God by their behavior, which doesn't match what they're preaching, is grounds for exile. Grounds for exile. So, point here up to the end of this paragraph, I think, is try to think of yourselves as a superior people because you know about the law. It's not knowing about it that makes you different. It's doing it that makes you different. So yes, you do know the law, but you have failed to be the light in an appropriate way. Any questions so far here? I haven't thought about how to provoke you guys to questions. I didn't get enough time for that today. Any thoughts? Okay. Verse 25. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law. But if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you who have the written code and circumcision but break the law. For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical. But a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. Okay, so here's a big, shift from where they're at, thinking I'm just in because I have the law, I know about the law, and I'm doing some things about the law here. I have these outward markers that put me on the end. And this shift that he talks about was spoken about in Scripture from the beginning of the Old Testament. That this is what I'm looking for. And so we'll look at a couple of passages here in the Old Testament to point to that. Let's go back to Ezekiel 36 again. I'm still over there. 36 verse 27. And I will, this is God saying what's going to happen. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes and be careful to obey my rules. Okay, so it's a spirit in them that makes them able to do that. Let's go back to Deuteronomy chapter 30. Verse 6. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart. Okay, so here's the same terminology. It's a heart, really is a heart issue. And the heart of your offspring, so you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and that you may live. And the Lord your God will put all these curses on your foes and enemies who persecuted you. So all the way back to Exodus, they were talking about this being a heart issue. Again, back to this idea of knowing the law, doing as much of the law as you can by your own will do, is different than having a relationship with God, a circumcised heart, a spiritual connection to God, and then you become a law fulfiller. Even if you've never read the Ten Commandments, and you have that kind of relationship, you will fulfill the intent of the law. Okay? So this is where we're looking at, moving from trying to observe to fulfilling the law, the intent. Let's see if I can read my notes or see if I got anything from somebody smart I wrote down here that'd be interesting. The value of the law is to show that you are a justified lawkeeper. Or is it that, or do you need another means of justification? Whether you're a Jew, proselyte, or a Gentile. Can you be justified by the law's lawkeeper? The answer is no. It's not going to happen. Okay? Chapter 3. Of Romans, I should say, perhaps. Okay, so as we start looking at chapter 3, you might even just take your finger and run through the text and look at the first 7-8 verses, how many question marks there are. Right? And so this is a string of theoretical argument here with, straw man perhaps, as Paul is weighing these situations out and the confusion. So these questions are asked then in the context of this broader portion of Scripture that really spans from chapter 1, verse 18 to chapter 3, verse 20. It's like this, in the context of all of that, is we're dealing with issues that are being dealt with, is the universal human sinfulness. We're dealing with the disloyal and unfulfilled covenant on the side of the Jews, their side of the covenant, their lack of loyalty there. as light bearers in the world. We're dealing with, again, God's righteousness through the gospel as it's revealed through the gospel. So these kinds of things that are all the backdrop for these quick fire questions here that he throws off. Then what advantage has the Jew? Or what is the value of circumcision? What do you think? Is there any value in it at all?
There's a perceived value, but it's not deep enough alone to save.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You know, Paul says in the next statement here, right? Much in every way. So there's some value in some kind of sense. There's some value in it. To begin with, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. Okay? So if you say there's two groups of people, there are the Gentiles who could look at creation, they could tell that there was a creator, but they didn't have the exact knowledge to understand him personally, maybe, to be able to know specifics. But you know, how special is it to say, Abram, now there's going to be a nation, and I'm just going to tell them. I'm going to tell them all that. I'm going to stay with them. They're going to be my people. I'm going to raise them up. I'm going to have this relationship with them and teach them what is to come and make them to be the people who can fulfill their side of the covenant. Well, is there any advantage in that? You would think yes, right? You would think, yeah, I want to be that where God is. So there's the advantage of it. Yeah, you were in relationship and knowledge, personal knowledge of God there. So there's an advantage. You had the oracles of God. He gave to you, not to them. But you were supposed to tell them about it, right? And you didn't so much do that. So yes, there is advantage to be favored in that way through God's redemptive plan for the whole world, to be from the beginning that people through which God was working and in which He was working it out. Okay, what if some were unfaithful? Does their faithfulness nullify the faithfulness of God? By no means. And here's the conundrum we talked about. I don't know if I did that in a sermon. Maybe talk about it like that. I said, yeah, conundrum. I used that terminology in a sermon last week, I think. Is, okay, here's a two-sided, two parts to the covenant. When you make a covenant, there's two parts. Here, I'm going to favor you and make you to become this people who are going to be blessing all families in all the world. They're going to be a holy nation, a priesthood to the world. They're going to be a light to the world. This is my side of the covenant, and through you, I'm going to build the eternal family of God, starting with you and through what you do. That's covenant on one side. Well, now, on this side is you got to go be the blessing. You got to perform the duties as a priest, a nation of priests, drawing people to God. You got to be the light. You know, that's your side of the covenant. Okay. So going along here, God's keeping His side, and Israel's not keeping their side. So what's God do then? When God looks at their failure, at their sinfulness, their disloyalty, when he adds all that up as opposed to blaspheming His name among the nations, you know, all of that. When He adds all that up and then doesn't even find anything in there about them fulfilling their side of the covenant, what's the right thing for Him to do?
Discipline.
Huh?
Discipline.
Discipline? Ultimately, from an eternal stance, what's the right thing for Him to do to a people like that?
Judgment.
That's the right thing to do. But is it? Because then also the right thing to do, because He is God, He is faithful, without fail. He will always do what He said He would do. It will happen when He said it. So the right thing to do is for Him to fulfill His covenant promise both through them and to the world without fail. So the right thing for Him to do is to keep His promises because He's God. Well, no, the right thing to do is for Him to bring judgment down on these sinful people. They're both the right thing to do. And He can't be God if He doesn't do both those right things. That's why it's a conundrum. It's something that can't be worked out amongst us. You know, in some way we could come up with. He has to come up with a way to do right by both of these things. So does our unfaithfulness, let's see, what if we're so unfaithful? Does the faithfulness nullify the faithfulness of God? Do you what we did just cancel it out? His promises is nullify it. No, because that's not God. God said He would do it, and He will do it. Okay, so there's something to solve there that's beyond even the conception of human beings to how you could possibly solve that. How can it be solved? So He's just asking these questions in the back and forth here. Let God be true, though every one of you were a liar. As it is written, that you may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. This is a quote from Psalm, 51st Psalm. Let's take a little bit of time to look at that. Let's go look at 51st Psalm. We'll read 10 verses of that. Verse 1. Have mercy. This is David. Now, David's caught in his sin. He's been found out. So this is David. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions and my sin is ever before me. Against you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. So you are justified, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. So there's the bit, right? So a lot of times in the New Testament when you get this bit and a reference back to